Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Courtney Scales from CCIQ and I'm your facilitator for today. Joining us today from Cullens Patent Trademark Attorneys is Reagan Gawley. A lot of people can tell you what you've done wrong when it comes to your IP and your business, generally after you've done it wrong, but at Cullens they try to be a little bit more preemptive than that. Today, Reagan is going to provide some tips on what they have seen businesses do well with IP to maximise the value of their IP and turn it into a true asset of the business. Before we start, if you would like to ask Reagan a question, you can do so at any time during the webinar using the chat box that appears to the bottom right hand side of your screen. All right, Reagan, let's get started.
Thanks, Courtney. Welcome to the webinar, everybody. You will find that today's webinar, although it's designed around tips, I'll do a fair bit of talking, so if people want to take notes, apparently you will get a copy of the slides, but a lot of what I say is probably not going to be on the slides. There are only 12 slides, so don't get too enamored. Each time I do one of these webinars, and I've done a few now, I'm required to present my expertise and establish my credentials. These are my credentials. So one thing I will clear up right at the start is patent and trademark attorneys. Some of you have probably heard this talk already. Patent and trademark attorneys are required to be engineers or scientists. We sometimes have legal backgrounds, so I've got a law degree as well as a commerce degree and an engineering degree. Yep, I spent a lot of time at uni. So some of us have law degrees, but most patent attorneys only have technical backgrounds. So we give advice that is, or could broadly be termed legal advice in relation to patents, trademarks and designs and copyright and stuff like that. But most patent attorneys don't have legal backgrounds, so we're relatively normal. That's all I'm going to say about my expertise. I've been doing this for a long time, which you'll probably see and hear once we get into the webinar a little bit. This webinar is about IP, so it touches on IP, but you'll probably find towards the end that it's a lot more business oriented rather than purely IP. I think there's only one IP slide in the whole thing. So it's more about what you do with your IP that creates value in the business, if you like. And businesses are two different types of, so you can have either an established business, so you're already running a business and you've come up with a new product or a new brand or a new concept that you want to implement, and this is sort of how do you play or ask the silly questions. And then there's the other side where it's more purely startup directed, so you have an idea and you want to design a business around that idea. So we'll touch on both sides, and hopefully people in both walks of life get something out of it. Okay, so the webinar is all about how to get it right. And normally, as Courtney said, you get it right by looking at what's been done badly or, in inverted commas, wrong in the past. A lot of people can tell you what they've done wrong, normally after they've done it wrong. So that's why I've said hindsight is 20/20. It's much easier to look back on something that you've already done and said, right, where did I go wrong? It's fairly common in this sort of field that, you know, a lot of new businesses fail. You know, there's a slide coming up that sort of goes through some of the reasons why, but, you know, the statistic that's often quoted is 90% of new business ventures fail within the first 1 to 2 years. So that's a fairly high proportion. But what that means is there's a lot of information out there, if you know where to look, about what people have done wrong. And it's particularly relevant to look at why people who run the business or start the business think they've gone wrong and then compare that with where they've actually gone wrong, which can be an interesting case in point. So as I said there, a lot of people can't pinpoint what's gone wrong until it goes wrong. And you want to try and be a little bit more preemptive than that. If you can look forward and say, well, these are areas that are going to be problem areas, if you identify them early enough, you can fix them before they become a problem. And that way you can not fall into that 90% that fail in 1 to 2 years. So the value, I guess, in the presentation is more about putting information out there about what people have done wrong so that you can look at that and say, well, is that something that I'm doing wrong, or is that something that potentially could go wrong in the future, to try and make you a little bit more aware of the problem areas that you should be looking at. So this is the slide I was talking about why businesses fail. So this was actually a study done. It was done on a number of blogs that were posted on a website specifically for the purpose, posted by the owners or operators or managers of businesses that have failed. And it basically said, it asked the question, why did you fail? They could then look at that and basically input information into this website about why they failed or why they thought they failed. So the graph on the right basically indicates it's startup directed, so it's people who have had an idea and have basically tried to create a business around that idea. So you can see there the majority of failures, if you like, in the startup phase are because the business model's not viable or they run out of cash. Now, we'll go a little bit more into the running out of cash thing because it turns out that the running out of cash issue is only, or it's more of an issue for companies that actually have money than companies that don't have money. But we'll get to that next. On the left-hand side of that, I've just picked three sort of types of companies or companies or startups in three different types of industry. So the fashion industry, the social media industry, and the software industry, and just pick some sort of points out of the study that was done. So it turns out that fashion companies mainly fail because they run out of cash or they're not able to secure funding. And when you think about that, that sort of makes sense. The fashion industry is relatively easy to get into. It's relatively cheap to start designing your own clothes, but it's quite expensive when you have to manufacture those clothes, particularly if the clothes are or could become popular, because you have to hold a fair amount of inventory. So startup costs aren't that high, but once you get just past that startup where you want to actually start manufacturing and selling, you have to hold a lot of inventory, which takes a lot of money. So it's not surprising that running out of cash or not being able to secure funding quickly enough causes those sorts of companies to fail. The next two are more interesting in that they don't have a manufactured product, if you like. So there's no inventory that you've got money sitting in a warehouse in the form of inventory. So social media companies, for example, they fail because they don't gain traction. So someone has a really good idea about a social media innovation and then tries to get it out there. It doesn't get any traction, so they don't start getting any revenue, and they fail that way, which is also related to that viable business model. So how do you create a viable business model as a social media company? Everyone's probably seen the movie about, The Social Network, about the rise of Facebook and how they had a disagreement. The founders of Facebook, or arguably the founders of Facebook, had an argument about how to monetize the site. So how do they turn something that was just people going onto the Facebook site and adding information, updating their profiles, how do they actually turn that into something that creates revenue? And that movie was a case in point about what people or the different views that people can have about what their business model actually is. Software companies the same. Software companies are classic for focusing. They're trying to turn out a technically perfect product. So a bit of software that does the job every time, does the job the same way every time. And sometimes getting the product to market in a form can be as important as getting the product to market in the perfect form. We'll pick some examples. Microsoft is a classic example. It is rare that they go to market with a Windows update that has no bugs. Apple's the same way. They rarely go to market with a product that is 100% perfect. They basically get it out there as soon as they can to get a jump on the market, and then they provide fixes later on in their upgrades. That's fairly common, and that's if software companies focus too much on getting the product perfect before it's released, it'll never be released. And the other thing there, interestingly, is software companies fail because they ignore what the customers want. They try and turn out a product that is perfect for them, but they forget that they are not their target market. And that's a classic example. So many companies around today, and we have this talk in our industry as well, is, if I try to choose advertising that I like, I am not my target market. You people are my target market. So what do you want? So focusing too much on what you think the client wants rather than what the client actually wants can lead you to fail as well. So as I said before, this is the money page, if you like. So one of the funny trends that came out of this particular study was that funded startups, so those that actually have money, fail more often than not because they run out of money, not because they have no money, because they've already got the money. So, and unfunded startups fail because their business model's not viable. So, as I said there, that may partly explain why the companies couldn't obtain funding in the first place, because the business model's not viable. And before someone is going to give you money, that's the first test they're going to say, how am I getting this money back? Where is the money coming from? Where's it coming from into your business? So unfunded startups also fail because of inexperience or a skills gap. So people go into business not knowing what's required or what they need to do in terms of the business. It could be, things as varied as they don't understand inventory control. They don't understand how to value inventory. They don't understand how to pay their employees. They don't understand that there are only two things in Australian law that company directors can be sued for, and that's not paying their tax and not paying their superannuation. They're the two things that directors get held personally liable for. So most of the other time you have a corporate veil, but not paying superannuation and not paying tax will get directors in trouble directly. So that's some trends out of, why businesses fail or startup businesses fail. Businesses that are already up and running that introduce new products don't fail as a business unless they've pinned their future on that particular product. And there has been cases of that happening. Kodak is a classic example where, they put all their eggs in one basket and assumed the camera's going to be around forever. And then the digital camera advent came and they basically died as a product. Sony is another one. They had so much invested in their mobile music provision platforms like the Walkman and stuff like that they didn't really adjust to people downloading things on their phones, so they really struggled to catch up. So existing businesses don't necessarily fail because they try and introduce a new product. What might happen is that new product might fail as a new product. So when we're talking about the difference between startups failing as a business and new products for existing businesses fail, generally there are sort of common themes between the two. So how do we get it right? This is my 6-point list as to how you get it right. We'll go through each one. Some of them are, you'll read that and look at them and go, yeah, okay, all of these things are really self-evident. But it's strange how much people miss out on one or two of these. It's strange that the first one that they miss out generally is on the commitment side. Nothing you do is going to become a success, whether it's a startup business based around a new product or whether it's a new product being introduced into an existing business, unless you commit to it. So, as I said there, it is surprising that a lot of people, you talk about this sort of stuff, a lot of people don't fully commit to the new product, whether it be a new product in an existing business or not. Most people, and I hear it all the time, most people have ideas, but they don't do anything about them. And the most important thing is, work out whether it's viable or not early. And if you think it is viable and you want to make a go of it, commit to making a go of it. You have to actually start. So, as I said there, starting doesn't actually always have to involve spending. So you can get into, or at least investigate viability for a lot of these things without actually spending a lot of money. The first thing people do when they have a good idea is, right, I'm going to get a website, or I'm going to start filing business name applications. That's a little bit turned about. You got a new idea. The first thing you should do is look at whether anyone's going to give you money for it. If it's a new product, are people going to buy that new product? Do they need the new product, or is it a want rather than a need? Does it hang off other products that are already around? So if your new idea is, a new set of headphones have to be plugged into something. So are sales of the thing that you're plugging it into rising, falling, staying flat? Is there a change in, people are moving away from Walkmans, for example, and moving more into phones? So, that has who do you approach? You can do a lot of that stuff without spending any money. A lot of market research and things like that, and we'll get into market research in a minute, but a lot of research stuff you can do without actually spending money, because a lot of this stuff is available and it's publicly available for free. You just have to know where to go. So if you've got a new idea, whether it's an existing business with a new idea or a business yet to be started and you've just had the idea, the most important thing is to decide whether or not you want to commit more time to it. And if you are going to commit more time, energy, money, you have to commit. You know, it's not going to happen overnight. The overnight successes are furphy. You know, people go on Shark Tank, you know, and might be overnight successes, but you can garner from the questions that the sharks actually ask that they're trying to work out whether it's pie in the sky stuff or whether it's actually based in reality. You need to work out whether it's based in reality or not, and then if you think it is, commit to it and then push forward. A lot of it, as you've probably picked up, is about asking the right questions. You may not know the right questions. There are no silly questions. There are no wrong questions. If you ask the question, you'll at least know more about it than you did before you asked the question. So you need to ask the right questions. You need to ask the right people the right questions as well. So most of that is bound up in research. And as I said, you can do a lot of research without spending a lot of money. It's relatively cheap. There are large publicly accessible databases that you can get lots of information about market research in particular. Probably the most underutilized market research database in Australia is the Bureau of Statistics. It's a government website. You can get on there and there's so much information on there. You actually have more problem finding the information on the website than actually knowing whether the information is there. There's, you know, information on buying habits, you know, which industries are trending up, down because of the information that the ABS collects. So if you want to look at market research for free or even just for interest, the Australian Bureau of Statistics website is a really good one. There are other places around that can help you do market research. So CCIQ can actually help you do or undertake market research. There are also companies out there in Brisbane or wherever you are, there will be someone who can undertake market research on your behalf to find out whether what you're thinking about is actually viable or not. I've just put 3 segments down there for market research, so you can look into who your customers are, finding information about people who buy televisions. Who buys televisions? Are they predominantly 16-year-old boys with an income of under $10,000, or are they predominantly mums and dads with, you know, an average household income of about $65,000 to $70,000? You can find that sort of stuff out. You can even find out what size the TV is and what type it is, and generally how old it is. Even you can look at industry information. So trends within a particular industry, how quickly industry leaders bring out new products. You know, everyone knows that the iPhone turns over every sort of 1 to 2 years, except this year where they brought out 2 models, completely different, but 2 different models. You can find that, or you can track the direction that an industry is growing or not growing through some of this stuff as well. And you can also do research into particular products. So, you know, what features do people like on their blenders? What features do people like on their phones? What features do people like, you know, on their carports or their curtains? All that stuff. You can find all that information out, even if you actually have to design a survey that is then undertaken. You can find it out. But as I said, there's lots of information available for free if you know where to look. Concept research is more about what you're going to do with the actual idea. So ideas in and of themselves are worth nothing. So what comes out of the idea is generally a product or a service. Is that product or service viable? Can you make the product now? How much is it going to cost? You know, it's very rare that you can go to a potential funder and say, well, I want $100,000 because I think my product's going to cost me $5 to make. And they take one look at it and go, yeah, we could land that in Australia for $1.50. You know, that sort of stuff. So you need to do some work into whether the concept is viable, the actual product or service. What's your price point? Stuff like that. You know, again, you can ask, or you can get that information from competitor research, which is the next one. So you can actually look at and judge price point and quality and things like that on the competitor products. So are you trying to replace a competitor product? Have you invented a phone and the competitors for you are mainly going to be Apple and Samsung? So Is your phone cheaper than theirs? Is your phone higher quality than theirs? Does it have features that the people are going to like more? Can you get software apps that you can embed in your phone that actually increase value of the phone to people, like embedding Spotify as an app in I think it's Apple do that, but stuff like that. So you can actually look at the competition to work out what, if anything, you can do and what, if anything, your product or service is going to look like when it's actually released. So if you do a bit of that, you'll at least know who you're up against as well. We have people walk in all the time and say, I've invented a new music streaming service. You go, yep, that's great. Your competitors are Apple, Google, they're just all of the big boys. Can you predictably release a product into that market and take some market share? Admittedly, the market's massive, but if you can't offer a product that is going to get some of that market, then you're not going to have any revenue and the business is ultimately going to fail. So you need to look at that sort of stuff to work out whether it's viable or not. What a lot of people don't do early enough is look into what funding is available. So there are a lot of sources of funding. You can fund things yourself. You can get government funding, you can get external funding. Most external funding or government funding, they're not going to give to you unless you've done a little bit of background work. They're much more likely to give you money if you can prove that thing's actually going to sell. So sometimes it's a catch-22 situation, in that the more you need the money, the less likely you are to get it. And the less likely you've got to prove that you don't need it in order for them to give it to you, which tends to be the way that some banks work. But there's a lot of money out there available. The state government has commercialisation programs. The federal government has commercialisation programs. That the money is already there, you just have to get it. So there are people out there that specialise in obtaining funding on your behalf. So they're normally sort of ex-employees of the people that administer the funding, that basically say, if you use me, I can practically guarantee that you'll get the funding, because I used to be the person that used to make sure or subject the funding requests to the investigation. So I used to apply the test, so I know what the requirements are. So there are people out there that do that sort of stuff. With funding, the biggest thing is asking. A lot of it's available online, so you can go to the DCITI, the Department of State Development, Innovation, Technology, the Queensland Government Department, and they have funding available on their website, and they've got a page that's devoted to it. With the federal government, same thing. There is within the government departments, there is a particular department that provides the funding, and you can go to their website and find out how much is available and what's available and what you have to do and all that sort of stuff. They do try and kill you a little bit with paperwork, and that's why going with someone who knows how the paperwork works is sometimes a good idea, but it is there. You just have to look for it and ask the question. The last one I've got there is IP research. So this is not the IP slide, but this is just one of the things that you might want to think about. The thing that's going to kill a new product launched to the market the fastest is getting sued for infringement. So the idea is not to get sued for infringement. The way not to get sued for infringement is to find out whether someone else has some form of intellectual property protection over the good or service or brand, for example, that you want to use. So a little bit of research here can save you a heap of issues down the road. Just one sort of anecdote. In the mid-thousands, maybe the late 90s, there was a brand of jeans around called Tsubi, T-S-U-B-I, and they were quite popular for quite some time, but they tried to launch their brand in Japan, and there was already a brand of shoes in Japan called Kasubi, K-S-U-B-I. So they basically said, no, you can't use that trademark in Japan, and if you do, we're going to sue you for infringement. So Tsubi actually rebranded, and they rebranded worldwide because they wanted a consistent brand across the world. It cost them a mint, and they ended up basically failing because they had to rebrand in one country. So little bit of investigation early could have found that other mark that could have helped them not build a brand around something that they were going to ultimately change, which cost them money to change and then lost them all their brand recognition as well. So a little bit of research before you do it can save you a whole lot of angst down the road. So after you've committed and you've done your research, there is a time for development. So I've put the experiential marketing up there and identified Shark Tank. Everyone's watched Shark Tank, or the majority of people listening will probably have watched Shark Tank. It is quite interesting. It's quite interesting to watch Shark Tank, though, from the point of view of what you would do differently if you went on there. Predominantly when people go on there, you've all seen this, they hand out a sample of the product, or they try and get the sharks to touch their product or use it or something like that. And you generally find that the sharks are much more engaged when they do that. So that's called experiential marketing. People who can touch and play with something, a new product, are much more likely to be invested in that product. They come away with a much better feel for whether they like it or they don't like it. So the development side is, once you've done your research, because you've already committed to doing this, you need to develop a product. And as the quote says at the bottom, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a prototype's worth 1,000 pictures. Having something to play with cannot be underestimated, that the value that it brings. So if you are selling a product or developing a product, or the idea is a product, getting a good prototype can be worth the money. It won't be cheap generally. So even relatively simple prototypes can be reasonably expensive, but they're becoming cheaper all the time. You know, you can get rapid prototyping done in Brisbane now. You can get things 3D printed if they're simple enough. You know, they 3D print metal things now. So all of this stuff is around, and that's reducing the cost for prototyping. So the earlier you get a prototype, the better, because it helps with other things like being able to work out how much the product is actually going to cost. So very difficult to, you know, even the quintessential, let's go to China and get a costing done. It's very difficult for someone to sit down and say, well, making that will cost X. Once they've made one or two, they have an idea of where the problems are and, you know, how long it's going to take and things like that, which helps them do a costing. So you can go to them and say, right, here's the prototype. How much would it cost to make 50,000 of these? And they can say $1. But if you don't have that prototype and they're just doing it from drawings, it's a little bit more potluck. There's going to be a lot bigger range in there. Costings are important, again, because people aren't going to invest unless you can tell them how much profit you're going to make and when they're going to get their money back. And profit is, you know, how much am I selling it for minus my costs? So you need to have a good idea of what the costs are, and prototyping helps with that. So find a good designer. There are a variety of different types of designers around. Don't go to a graphic designer to design a product, because graphic designers mainly do sort of branding things, visual things. For prototyping, you'll generally need an industrial designer, but there are industrial designers around. Classic example, you know, if you want to find one, is go to the Design Institute of Australia, and they actually break down the registered designers, or the people that are members of the Design Institute, into two groups, industrial and graphic. So you can go through that, you can find them, you can search, find one in your area, then you can subject them to the, you know, what type of work have you done before, have you had any hits, you know, what's your design process like, how involved do I have to be, how much does it cost? You can do all that sort of stuff once you've found one. So getting it right early is a big advantage, not only for the costing stuff, but when you go to market, you want a product that is fully realized, if you like. You don't want to take a half-baked product, particularly something that, you know, it's a bit different in the software arena where they're selling, they can sell an update or provide an update relatively easy. If someone buys a product, if someone buys a set of steak knives, they want the steak knives to be finished. They don't want them to be half finished. They don't want them to require sharpening or their handles to need shaping or anything like that. So particularly with products that you might be wanting to sell, it's important to get the product design nutted out and laid down as early as possible. It'll save trouble in the long run. So here's the IP. You know, you've been waiting for it, I know. Here's the IP part of it. Look at whether you can protect what you want to do. So if you are releasing a new service, can you protect that using brands? If you are selling a product, can you protect the product? If the product is new, you might be able to. If the product is new, you might be able to protect both the product itself and the brand that you're going to sell it under. The two questions, well, the first part there, whether you seek protection and what type of protection and where you seek and all those things are value questions. Is there value in seeking the protection? And I say that because a lot of people file lots of different types of applications for protection of intellectual property where the intellectual property or the right that they get doesn't actually provide them with any value. So the value in IP is mainly the ability to prevent your competitors from copying your product. So the best product in the world is useless if no one's going to buy it, or it's valueless if no one's going to buy it. But if people are going to buy it and you do start to eke out a bit of the market, people will copy. If you're making money out of it, then they go, right, I can make money out of that too, and I'll just copy theirs because it's easier and I can get a leg up. So that's where IP can be important. But it is always a question of value. People come into my office all the time and say, you know, is it worth protecting? And you go, right, that's more a question for you than me. I can tell you how much it's going to cost to protect it, and then you have to make the decision about whether, you know, spending $5,000 on a patent application is going to be money that you are going to get some value out of. If you're going to make $10,000 out of a $5,000 patent, then it's worth it. If you're going to make $2,000 out of a $5,000 patent, it's not. So a lot of this stuff is, you know, common sense, but you need to know how much it's going to cost, over what period, are there, you know, follow-on costs, what to protect and where to protect it, they're the two major questions. So you can protect different aspects of IP. So you can protect the product itself, you can protect the brand, you can protect the way it looks, you can protect the way it works. That's more a question for someone who knows what they're talking about, though. So you can take it to someone and say, most patent attorneys give you free consultations up front to explain the process. You can take it to them and say, right, this is the concept. What would we protect? How much is it going to cost? Where to protect it is another thing. IP is territorial, so you need to know where you're going to protect it. If your major market is the US and you don't really care about Australia, you might file into the US and not file in Australia at all, which will save you money. A lot of new product stuff gets done in Australia, and I can say that because Cullens files more patent applications for Australian clients than Australian individuals than any other firm in Australia. And we're third on the list of Australian clients overall. So we do a lot of this work. So a lot of people file their applications first in Australia because it's the home market and it's relatively easy. Once you start getting overseas, it gets very expensive. So a lot of people start here. The last 3 points on this slide are more about general sort of legal protections than strictly IP protections. You need to look at things like your business structure. So if someone pays you money, how are you going to get that money out of the business? What happens a lot of the time in structuring is there's an operating company that has a license to an IP holder. So there's an IP holding company that licenses that IP to a trading company. The trading company makes the money. The trading company pays the IP company a license fee. So you have to work out how to get the money out of the IP holding company, because the bulk of the profit in the trading company is going to get paid to the IP holding company. Normally, the IP holding company is owned by one or more family trusts, and you take the money out that way. There are a variety of different ways to structure a business for tax purposes, for asset protection purposes, and again, you're probably better off talking to someone who knows a bit more about it than you may at this stage. They'll give you a variety of different structures, explain the pros and cons of each, and you can choose. You don't have to file applications to protect things. You can protect things using agreements. So if you have the design of a product and you want to take it to China to get it made, you'll probably need a manufacturing agreement. You may or may not need a distribution agreement. You may or may not need a license agreement. But the license agreement, distribution agreement, manufacturing agreements, even development agreements where, you know, I've got an app, someone needs to write the app. Who's going to write the app? I'm going to go to an app company. You know, that agreement with the app company to develop the invention a little bit more will be, you know, or should be subjected to a little bit of legal review by someone who's working for you rather than just adopting the development agreement that the software company gives you. So you need to look at agreements. Agreements are contractual though, mainly the realm of solicitors. So you want to be shopping around for a solicitor. And if you don't know one that knows a bit about this stuff, let me know. I can give you some names. Manufacturing agreements, we've already covered that, but normally there's not a lot of stuff manufactured in Australia anymore. In fact, it's declining. You probably all saw that the last Toyota rolled off the production line last week. So fewer and fewer things are being manufactured in Australia, which means you're generally going to be dealing with overseas companies. If you're dealing with overseas, it's generally going to be in a foreign language. If you're going to China or Taiwan, for example, you're going to need someone who knows the Chinese language so they can subject any sort of agreement to a Chinese language interpretation as well as an English one. So that's just a couple of tips with the legal environment. Once you've done all of that, and you should start thinking about this one right up the front. How do you monetize this? So you've had an idea. How do you actually make money out of it? It sounds like a very simple question, but it's actually very difficult to answer. There are two main ways that you can make money out of an idea. You can either do it yourself, so you create a business around that idea, or you release that product or concept through an existing business, or you can license the idea or the use of the idea to a third party. So the do-it-yourself way, as I've said there, you bear the risk, but you get the reward too. So you wear most of the cost, if not all of it, but you retain ownership in it 100%. So if you make any money, you make 100% of that money, less tax and all that sort of stuff. So it's generally a lot more difficult to do it yourself unless you know what you're doing. It is generally easier for an existing business to release a new product to the market than it is for someone to build a business from the ground up based around a new product, just because of the risks that are involved. You don't have any market acceptance, that'll kill it. If you get sued for infringement, that'll kill it fast too. So there are risks, but if you are successful, then you get all the reward. With the licensing thing, that's generally a little bit easier to do because of the lower risk. Licensing in and of itself is not easy to do. You need to find the right dance partner, as I've said there, and it generally involves you giving something away. So you can either give away a part of the invention, so you can sell 50% of the company to someone else and they can put funding in. Licensing generally, though, is the royalty stream. So you give the ability to a third party to do something, generally whatever they want with your IP. You retain ownership, but you give them the right to do something with it, and in return they pay you X dollars, X cents per unit. So they wear a lot of the risk, and that's where the issues come generally. It's hard to find a person that has as much emotion about the idea as you do. They will typically look at it through very pragmatic eyes and say, right, I'm going to give you $2 per unit. Am I going to make $2 per unit? Am I going to make $1.50 per unit? Once I've paid you your $2, am I still going to make any money? They generally wear the risk. As I said, they've normally got, the reason you go to them is they've normally got distribution chains or manufacturing or something like that. So they're wearing a lot of the risk in relation to this stuff. So you've got to be a little bit reasonable about A, what your royalty rate is, and B, it will take a lot of time to find not only the right entity, so the right company that might want to license it, but the individual within that company who has the ability to say, yes, I want to license that, and then come to an agreement with you. That's very difficult. And as an aside, Bunnings don't license things. So a lot of people come to us and go, I've got an idea. What's your plan to make money out of it? I'm going to get some prototypes made, and then I'm going to sell it to Bunnings. Bunnings don't do that. Bunnings rent you shelf space. So it's important to know who you're dancing with or who you want to dance with as well. Picking the wrong type of company and then investing energy into getting them as a licensee can lead you to nothing. So do a bit of research into who is a likely licensee, and that may be a competitor. It may not be, but it may well be. If it fits in well with their product suite or the service suite, then they may be interested in licensing it, even though at the start you look at it and go, well, they're actually a competitor of mine rather than someone who I can work with. So it might involve a little bit of work to license. Generally, it's lower risk for you if you can get it done. But they're the two main ways, and you have to decide which way you really want to go. The last thing that I've included here is review. None of these things are set and forget. You have to undertake sort of the review process. You have to do it at the start, obviously, as I've said there. But you have to also do it during the course of the life or the development cycle as well. There's no point doing it at the start and going, right, it's completely economically viable because at the moment, the cost of materials to produce this thing are dirt cheap. You're making batteries and there's lithium everywhere to get you into the battery market. Then in a year's time, just as you're about to release the product, the price of lithium goes through the roof. If you're not looking at that, then you can get caught because people put an order in, you go looking for it at a particular price point. It's not at that price point. In fact, it's 3 times that price point. You can't provide that, or you can't fill that order. So you need to look at things like raw materials, manufacturing costs, and you keep reviewing this. You can't just do it at the start and then forget about it. You need to be harsh, as I said there, but if you can't be harsh, then at least be realistic. What you must remember is if it's your idea, generally you're emotionally connected to it. If you're emotionally connected to it, then it affects your ability to be hard-nosed, if you like. That's why you generally want someone around you that can look at it and go, right, you're getting in over your head. You're just spending, you're throwing good money after bad. You need to stop. Or, you're picking on the wrong market. You need to perhaps, I'm not saying the idea is not a good one. I'm not saying the idea is not a viable one, but you seem to be in the wrong market because you're just getting no traction. So forming a little set of advisors that can help you can be really good because they can give you an unbiased view, whereas your view is normally going to be biased about whether it is or is going to be a success. So you can find someone else to do the review for you, and typically that's going to help. PS on that one, don't ask your mum, don't ask your wife, don't ask your brother. Relations generally don't give you an unbiased view. That's why things like Shark Tank are pretty good. People go on there, and you've seen them go on there with delusions of grandeur, and they walk out and just go, I can't believe they don't believe in it as much as I do. And that's because they're subjecting it to, a really hard-nosed, unvarnished view. They want to know whether I can make money out of it, because if I'm going to invest my money, that's what I want. I want my money back as soon as possible. How are you going to do it? So I've just put my inspiring quote on the bottom of that slide for you. Nothing in this field comes without work. There will be a lot of people who will be willing to say, no, that's not going to work. In fact, happens every day. Even where I work, you look at it and go, I'm not really sure. But things are successes, provided that you set it up correctly and then you actually do something about it. So ask the right questions, and you'll generally get enough information that you can draw your own conclusion from there. So I hope that's been helpful. I've reached 2 minutes over the end of my time slot, but if anyone has any questions, feel free.
Thanks, Reagan, for that great presentation. We do have time to run through a few questions. We've got about 8 minutes left. We just have a few questions. Is there any difference in the considerations if you're a startup, aka a new business, or an existing business that is expanding to new products?
You've probably picked up from the presentation that the considerations aren't different, but necessarily. You still go through the same types of questions. You still review it in a similar way. Existing businesses that are releasing new products might have advantages over a startup business in that they'll have more resources. They may have access to distribution. They may have access to manufacturing. Normally what you find, or it's rare that existing businesses start inventing new products outside their sphere of expertise. And if they do, that sends up red flags straight away. So existing businesses have an advantage over startups, but that's not to say that the considerations are different. The considerations are generally similar. You just might come at them from a slightly different point of view. So, existing business, I've got a revenue stream that I can use to pay for development. Startup business, where am I going to get the money to pay for a prototype? And that may come from funding. So existing businesses have access to government funding as much as startups do. So they may come from the same pool, but an existing business is a lot more likely to have a revenue stream than a startup business is, where you might have to fund it yourself and or get government funding. So the question about where the money is coming from to pay for it is still a valid one. It's just that the answer might differ a little bit. So it's discussions like this that sort of give you an insight as to where the money might come from if you are a startup versus an existing business. And that's why we try and provide this sort of stuff.
Great, thank you very much. Alrighty, we've got another question here. You're a patent attorney, but a lot of this presentation is about commercialism. Why is that?
I am a patent attorney. I stand accused. I am guilty. Look, the reason that we do talks like this is that primarily people who come to us because they want to protect a new idea or an invention or a brand or whatever. They come to us for the protection, but what they really want is, how do I get this thing off the ground? So my business has sort of morphed over the last 10 years, where people come and say, I want to get a patent, and you say, that's great. What do you actually need the patent for? What are you going to use it for? How are you going to make money out of the patent? Because having IP protection is all very well and good, and I am a proponent of good IP protection. But you need good IP protection that is valuable. If it's not valuable to you or adding value to your business, it is pointless. So all IP discussions, if you like, take place on a broader canvas. So we are always looking, and as I said before, we do a lot of work for Australian companies and inventors in this space, because what they're really concerned with is not getting IP protection. They're concerned about, how do I protect the thing that I think is going to form a large part of my revenue stream moving forward. So it is business oriented, and you have to look at these things from a business point of view. Looking at it through rose-colored glasses, everyone's going to want to buy this. It's going to be the biggest seller ever. That stuff is, you have to have commitment, you have to have enthusiasm for the product, but that stuff that isn't based in reality can actually hurt you more than help. So all of these discussions always take place in a business context, because ultimately, and this might be talking out of school, ultimately people don't do anything with new ideas, new brands, new concepts if it doesn't make them any money. The object is always to make money. Go back to that monetizing slide. It's always about making money or adding value. The sole exception to that is non-profits, but even non-profit organizations can't spend money on protection and not get some form of value back, whether that value is in awareness for a particular cause. That is value, and therefore the brand that they use to encapsulate that value is important, and it is still valuable even though it's in a non-profit scenario. So all of these things ultimately are about value and extraction of value, and you don't do it unless you're going to extract some value. So find where the value is and then start there.
Alrighty, we've just got one last question, about 2 minutes to answer that one. Sorry to put you on the spot, Reagan. So we just have a question that says, could you please briefly address the protection or trademark of service or product names and the process surrounding that?
In 2 minutes, right. There have been books written about this. You can protect names, you can protect logos. The best form of protection you can get for a brand is the word itself, if there is a word. So if you can get it, that's what you want. When you file a trademark application, you are required to designate the particular goods and or services that you are going to use the mark in relation to. So, if I wanted to trademark Regan's T-shirts for T-shirts, I'd have to say I want to apply for Regan's T-shirts for T-shirts. You make an application to the Trademarks Office. It gets examined. The examiners normally raise one of two things. Those two things are normally there are prior marks on the register that block yours for the same goods or services, or the trademark is what they call non-distinctive, so descriptive trademarks. So Regan's T-shirts is completely descriptive of a shop owned by Regan that sells T-shirts. Therefore, you're not going to get it registered. So bad example by me. But if you make lawnmowers and you want to call your lawnmower the stealth lawnmower, then that's not a bad mark. It tells you more or less that the lawnmower is going to be quiet, but it's not directly descriptive of a quiet lawnmower. That would be silent lawnmower or something like that. So you've got to pick a good mark, and good marks are marks that allude to what you're doing but don't outright describe it. So you make the application, they have a look at it with those two things in mind. If they think it's registrable, they write back to you and say, yep, it's registrable. If they don't think it's registrable, they write to you and say no. You can argue with them. In fact, you are encouraged to argue with them. There are a variety of ways to get it registered if it's not distinctive or there are prior marks on the register. One thing to remember about trademark protection, though, it is territorial. So you have to file trademark applications in the countries where you want the protection. The other big thing with trademarks is you can actually start to use a trademark before you file for protection. With patents and designs, with new products, if you want to protect the product, then you can't publish it before you protect it. So trademarks you can use before you file, but new products should not be released before you file for some sort of protection. There you go, trademark protection in 2 minutes.
All right.
Any questions, ask me.
Thank you very much for that. That's all the time we have for today. On behalf of CCIQ, I'd like to thank Reagan for taking the time to present today. I would also like to thank everyone who's joined us for today's session. All of our registrants will receive a copy of the webinar recording and the presentation slides, which you should receive next week. And thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to welcoming you to another CCIQ webinar in the very near future. Thank you very much, everyone.